Ultimately, we're concerned with financial loss and whether or not our campaigns are actually performing. And so I think marketers are increasingly aware that not all programmatic spending is effectively reaching the target audiences that we want it to.
Hello, and welcome to The Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Jasper. I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-host, Angela Voss, the CEO of Marketing Architects, and Rob DeMars, the Chief Product Architect of Misfits and Machines.
Hello.
We're back with our thoughts on some recent marketing news, always trying to root our opinions in data, research, and what drives business results. Today, we're discussing Bob Hoffman's latest book, Inside the Black Box: How Marketers Waste Billions on Online Advertising. Hoffman is a best-selling author. He's previously an agency CEO and one of the most influential voices in advertising, in my opinion. You can always count on Hoffman to deliver strong takes, and this book is no exception. If you're a marketer spending any money on online advertising, I think you'll want to listen to this episode. But to tee us up, I'll quote directly from his introduction. In 2024, marketers will spend over $650 billion on online advertising. A big proportion of this, perhaps in the hundreds of billions, will be completely wasted. Hoffman goes on to point out that this isn't due to bad advertising. It's because of scams like ad fraud, MFAs, fees, unreliable data, click fraud, false attribution, and more. I did read his book, and he does a nice job of breaking down a few different challenges marketers face when buying online ads. So I thought we could go sort of topic by topic today. So I'll intro the topic by spooking us a little bit with some of the stats he shares, and then I'll let Ange and Rob help define the challenge and offer up some solutions, because we're not just about scaring people here. Also, I should add, and he includes this as a disclaimer in the book, but I'm going to be quoting a lot of numbers about fraud, how much is wasted. These don't add up to a number that makes sense, for the record. Like, if you added all these numbers up, it's like, okay, we're wasting more money on online ads than we're even spending, which I don't think it reduces the concern. It just shows that we're not great at tracking this stuff. And no one really knows exactly what's going on, but we know that it's not good. So with that rosy intro, let's start with programmatic media buying. Here are a couple of stats. 70 to 90% of online advertising is transacted programmatically. The ANA claimed in 2023 that 25% of programmatic ad dollars are wasted. This would mean over $130 billion is wasted. Ads from an average programmatic campaign will appear on over 40,000 websites. According to the ANA and PwC, 70% of online advertising dollars spent on programmatic advertising never touch a human being. And according to Bob Hoffman, if you spend $1 on programmatic advertising, you actually bring in about 3 cents in terms of actual ads viewed by actual people. I thought you'd like what he coins this, Rob. He calls it the programmatic poop funnel.
Ooh, can we add a toilet flush sound effect right now?
Yeah, Taylor, please add that in if possible. All right. Well, Ange, first, could you help us with the difference between buying media programmatically versus directly?
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start. So in the simplest form, programmatic buying uses software to automate digital ad buying. And so it relies on algorithms for efficiency and targets specific user profiles in real time, whereas direct buying involves manual negotiations with publishers to secure ad spaces. Programmatic is really thought of as the king for speed and scalability across diverse platforms. Direct buying provides more control, you could say, in terms of ad placement and campaign specifics.
How does Bob Hoffman address streaming as it relates to programmatic buying? Are the trends similar, or is streaming considered a different sector of programmatic buying altogether?
I don't think that he specifically talked about CTV or streaming in the book. He talked about programmatic more generally, but Ange, I would think that the concerns about programmatic buying would also apply to CTV.
Yes, for sure.
So then, speaking of that, Ange, what do you think about just this level of programmatic waste? Should marketers be concerned, and what should they do in response?
I think anytime we're using the word waste, it raises concern, right? When you're a marketer, we're concerned with efficiency. Ultimately, we're concerned with financial loss and whether or not our campaigns are actually performing. And so I think marketers are increasingly aware that not all programmatic spending is effectively reaching the target audiences that we want it to, due to factors like ad fraud and lack of transparency. So when we think about what can we do about it, there's a couple of things I think to think through. Number one, just do we have detailed enough reporting? We should be ensuring that we've got transparent, detailed reports that break down where an ad's being placed, the audience that's being reached, the engagement metrics, if that makes sense, for each of the campaign components. Then we can go into things like verification and viewability. Are we getting confirmation that our ads are being seen by real people, not robots, and that they're appearing in suitable contexts that either match the brand's values, their target audience, whatever they were intended to do? Are we getting that transparency back? And then I think third, when we think about waste, even just fee structures, right? Understanding that all of our costs involved are being accounted for, any middlemen or hidden fees, we want to understand what's going on there. And that transparency will just ensure that marketers are only paying for what ultimately delivers value to their campaigns.
Going back to what Rob asked earlier about CTV, I think, Ange, we've had now like more experience as an agency with those types of challenges and what to do about them, because when we're buying radio and linear, it's just a different type of space. But CTV, you're starting to encounter these challenges. So I know that we've had to put our own kind of systems in place to prevent that type of waste from happening.
When you think of CTV, screen on the wall in the living room, less chance of some of the made for advertising, fraud, click type stuff that happens in the digital space, but it's still out there. Something to be aware of.
So speaking of just like general programmatic waste, DR advertisers, you would think they'd have a harder challenge with this than brand advertisers, but I kind of wonder if it's easier, because if you're looking at your marketing and you've really got great attribution in place, like you're really judging what's performing, I would think that that could help with this a little bit, right? Because if 70% of your ads aren't being seen by real people and you have good attribution in place, that should raise a red flag, versus if you're a brand that just spends hundreds of millions on online advertising, some of this waste, it might be harder to identify it.
To me, the impression fraud is the one to probably be most concerned with, but there's also click fraud. There's also attribution fraud. So unfortunately, those that exist in the DR space and are looking for those engagement metrics don't get a free pass on it. That'd be great if they did. But yeah, they've got kind of a mechanism in place to try to better understand what's working versus what's being seen. But if you also have click fraud going on or attribution fraud going on, then those are things that you have to watch out for as well.
Well, we are going to get more into ad fraud in a little bit, but let's move on to a different fun topic, which is MFAs. We covered MFAs a couple of months ago on the show, but it's still a very hot topic in the marketing industry, so I think it's worth revisiting. Now let's find out what's wrong with them. So the ANA says about 15% of programmatic ad dollars are eaten up by MFAs. In one case that I've seen this published elsewhere, not just from Bob Hoffman, Forbes actually made an MFA site. And to get an idea of the scale of the fraud of this, a reader on the primary Forbes domain, you usually encounter between 3 to 10 ads as you're reading an article, which still feels like a lot of ads. If you are someone who hit this MFA site, you might be seeing over 200 ads during a single page view. So Rob, first of all, could you help us define what's an MFA site again?
MFA stands for Made for Advertising, although it's also referenced as Made for AdSense, which makes sense just because so much of what these MFA sites are trying to drive to is Google ads, right? And that's where the money's being made. But generally speaking, an MFA site is going to suffer from content quality. So the content is usually low quality, it's poorly written, often heavily plagiarized. What you were just talking about, Elena, that ad ratio to content tends to be really high in terms of the amount of ads per content delivered. They're heavily focused on SEO, which makes sense because they're trying to win the search game. The user engagement tends to be quite low on them. And they're pretty ugly, just subjectively, but kind of objectively too. They tend to just be pretty manufactured and ugly looking sites. You pretty much know you're on one when you're on one.
So Rob, what's your opinion on the problem of MFAs, and what if I'm a marketer? Oh, if I'm a marketer, I am a marketer. What can marketers do in response?
We touched on this a while back, and I'm not on that same page, I think, as you guys were in terms of just how much of a problem MFA sites are as it relates to things like brand safety. At the end of the day, MFA sites are going to be sniffed out by search algorithms, and those continue to get better and better in terms of not coming across as truly quality content. I think also advertisers are just onto them and they're monitoring them more than they have been in the past. There's been a huge growth in ad blocking technology as well that really prevents these things from entering the periphery of your consumer. But I think the brand safety thing tends to be where it comes up the most. And is it a true issue that way? There's plenty of things that an advertiser can do. There's plenty of ad network management tools out there that both Google AdSense and Google Ads offer. Even within your own organization, how do you deploy whitelisting and blacklisting of the different MFA sites you are okay utilizing and just being aligned internally on that? There are things also just related to just do more direct buying and using third-party ad verification services. There's plenty of those out there, Ad Science, Double Verify, or Moat, that can help you with that as well.
Rob, I know last time we talked about this in the podcast, we got into kind of a brand safety debate. I do wonder how bad is being on an MFA site when there's 200 ads. Like, you're not going to remember even what's on it. I know it's still a problem, but just like, I don't know if I would remember if I hit that Forbes site and I saw 200 brands. I'd maybe remember one of them.
I just don't think you're going to go, I hate that brand because it's amongst the 200 other brands on that particular page. That's where I think it's maybe less of a concern.
More of the waste. And I've definitely noticed there's been more conversation about MFAs. It seemed like it wasn't a huge topic even a year ago, but definitely more awareness, which is a good thing. Well, let's move on to a topic that probably has the highest awareness of any that we're going to cover today, and that is ad fraud. So we've got some especially scary stats here. According to Juniper Research, ad fraud cost advertisers $84 billion in 2023. They report that 22% of all digital ad spend goes to fraud, and they're predicting it'll reach $100 billion this year. So congrats, marketers. In 2020, Barracuda Networks reported there was more traffic on the web from bots than from humans. The World Federation of Advertisers says that by 2025, advertising fraud may be the second largest source of criminal income on the planet after drug trafficking. We've almost got them, people.
Wow.
Yikes. This is not funny. Check, a fraud detection company, says online ad fraud is larger than credit card fraud, despite the credit card industry being 10 times the size of online advertising. And Uber said that attribution fraud was eating up 100 million of their 150 million online ad budget. So that's 2/3 of their spend. They turned that off and they saw basically no change to performance. So, Ange, what is ad fraud? There's definitely not just one kind we have to worry about there.
Right. Yeah, it even further complicates an already complicated and expensive issue. But you're right. There are multiple variations, which just most simply, when we talk about ad fraud, it's any deceptive activity that would falsely inflate the performance of your ad campaign. So we talked about a little bit about this already, but click fraud, right? Where you have bots, or it could be people repeatedly clicking on ads to inflate engagement metrics. Impression fraud, creating fake ad views to charge advertisers for non-existent impressions. You've got attribution fraud, which is when fraudsters would end up manipulating the data that credits conversions to specific ad placements, which would mislead us all about which ads are effective. Like that one's really, I mean, they're all scary, but when we're trying to optimize campaigns amongst a variety of channels and you've got so many buys in place through a DSP, or even if you're going direct, like you can see how it gets really messy really quick. And then a couple additional that maybe you don't hear as much about would be ad injection. So unauthorized ads are inserted into web pages, stealing potential revenue from legitimate ad spaces. And then something called pixel stuffing or ad stacking, which involves placing multiple ads on top of each other in a single ad slot, or reducing the ad size to that of maybe just a pixel. And this is unseen by users, but it's reported as a legitimate impression.
If you ever Google click farm and look at the images, it's sad. I mean, you see
it is
these
sad.
Poor people sitting there with 100 devices in front of them, just pushing buttons all day.
Yes, I know. It feels like out of a movie, but sadly, it's real life.
That was one of my questions, is what does ad fraud look like practically with the people that are doing it? Because there's all this money, obviously, like people are making, I mean, millions, billions of dollars off of it. So I'm guessing a large chunk of it, yeah, Rob, comes from that, like full scale operations where their whole mission is just ad fraud. It's like what they do as a business.
On a lighter note,
That wraps it up for run off and be scared. No, what can we do? It's a massive problem. I think when I think about like as a marketer or as our marketing team, this is not probably solvable, but are there things that we can do to help minimize? I mean, just at the very beginning, like get familiar with a group like TAG. Trustworthy Accountability Group, I think is the acronym there, which is just a leading body that was formed to help fight this criminal activity. They're going to give guidance to, in addition to obviously working with companies like a Double Verify, etc. But they're going to help us understand how to invest in fraud detection technology. They're going to give guidance on traffic verification services. When we talk about rigorous reporting and monitoring, what does that look like? How do we continually analyze traffic and ad campaign data for any irregularities or patterns that are indicative of fraud? Choosing reputable platforms and partners, they can give guidance to something like that. And even just something like, how do you keep your team educated in a space like this when it's rapidly, I think, maybe not evolving, maybe it is evolving, but scaling possibly. I think this is an area where people get really worried about AI. How could that magnify the problem even further? But I think there are ways with AI as well that we can really help in this realm as well.
It's a huge problem, obviously, and a lot of horror stories, but I think Uber's story is a story of a brand that did something about it just through testing. They just said, what happens if we turn off some of our marketing spend? I'm guessing they went channel by channel and just started shutting things off and seeing what happens. All right. We've got one last topic for today, which is viewability. And here are some stats. According to Integral Ad Science, 30 to 50% of display ads are non-viewable. And according to Lumen Research, only 9% of online ads get even 1 second of consumer attention. So Rob, first, what makes an ad viewable?
I think it's actually ridiculous. What is considered a viewable ad, both in display ads and in video ads? So you had mentioned the 1 second rule for display ads. So at least 50% of the ad must be seen for 1 second. For video, it's 50% of the ad needs to be seen for at least 2 seconds. It's a pretty low bar. And that is set up by the Media Rating Council, or is kind of responsible for those standards in combination with the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the IAB.
Yeah, that's pretty concerning in itself. Maybe the better question should be what marketers can do to make sure their ads are viewable, but I guess maybe viewable in a better way than even the viewable standard. What could marketers do?
There's definitely things that we all know are best practices. How do you show up above the fold, right? So that people don't have to scroll down. There's leveraging the sticky and floating ads that are becoming more and more popular right now. So those will adjust as you're scrolling with them. Just continuing to negotiate with your providers on where things are being placed. Continue to educate yourself on the standards, I think, and challenging those standards with your media buyers. Just because that's what the industry is saying doesn't mean you have to be okay with that. And then, of course, we always say this on this podcast, test, and iterate, because that's how you're going to continue to find what is causing people to view your ads more, both in the creative and in the placement.
I think a mindset of incrementality is always helpful. So even going back to your example about Uber, Elena, if it's not viewable, it's not being clicked. So if we're looking for performance and we're able to do kind of like pre-pulse post with turning channels on or off or certain publishers on and off, that can be a good way to think about that as well.
So I think to wrap us up here, there's more topics in the book. I'd encourage everyone to go read it. It's a short book, but full of a lot of great information. I feel like step one for marketers is just awareness. Are you aware of what some of the problems are, what the challenges are, and the chance that, yeah, if you're a marketer spending on online advertising, you're probably not immune to some of these challenges. Then I think working with good partners, we have a lot of great names of people you can work with to try to prevent wasted spend. I'd also give a quick plug to stuff like linear TV, radio. Like there are some channels that are going to have less of that problem. So just another reason to invest in TV. And then finally, no one can just not spend on online advertising. So testing, incrementality, how can you pressure test your budgets? Because I've even heard a lot of scary things about, even if you have an ad fraud solution in place, like that might not be totally accurate. So it feels like at the end of the day, no matter who you partner with or what channels you're on, you're also the steward of your budget and figuring out how do we test frequently and question spend to make sure that it's going to the right places. Let's not overtake drug trafficking, people. Marketers do not need that honor, okay? Final question. Despite what it may sound like, we do have state and federal laws in the US that prosecute things like ad fraud. I honestly had to look this up because I was like, how in the world is this happening at such a large scale? But we do have them, and people have been fined, and they've spent time in prison for these crimes. However, we clearly haven't mastered how to identify all the online advertising schemes we've covered today, and some, like MFAs, actually operate in a legal gray area, so they're not even definitively illegal. So Rob, and I thought that while we're in this nice litigation spirit, I wanted to ask, what's your favorite sort of unusual or funny law?
Oh, it's my favorite spirit. It's the litigation spirit. Rob, what's yours?
Well, I had to look this up just to confirm, but Minnesota law number 342.36 is that it is illegal to grease a pig and then release it as a part of a contest, sport, or event, which I was really bummed to hear because that ruins my weekend plans.
I was going to say, I support that law. Leave the pigs alone.
Like, how do there's a good reason. You just want to know, like, how did that make it in?
How did that make it to law? Someone had to say, we have a greasing of the pig problem here in Minnesota.
I know that a high school, I won't name it, a high school by mine, because we all happen to live in Minnesota. I know that for their senior prank, they released 3 pigs into their high school, might have been greased, and they were numbered 1, 2, and 4.
Okay.
And I know that happened at a high school near mine. So there might be a reason for this.
Was there a third pig that didn't make it to the event? Was it bacon or something?
I think that was part of the joke, is that they're going to continue looking for pig number 3. Anyways, Ange, you go ahead.
Got it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, Rob.
Sorry. I'd be the guy looking for the third pig.
Exactly. That's why it was such a great prank.
I feel like the brand value on Minnesota is dropping. Like, we could see it actually ticking down with anyone that's listening. I don't know if these are related. And by the way, speaking of fraud, there's a ton of completely not true, quote unquote, laws that are in place when you look up what are the funny or silly laws that exist. Everything from you can't cross the border with a chicken on your head to, so I had to really look a little bit. So this one's not fun, but I do think this is strange. And this, I guess, shows the type of house I grew up in. But in the state of Minnesota, it is unlawful for a person under 21 to consume or possess alcohol unless it is in the home of their parents or guardian and with the consent of the parent or guardian, which in itself to me is interesting. Feels like a law that's a law unless you're in your own home. And then what I also found funny when I was literally on the law site seeing this, the very next line says it's unlawful for anyone to sell, furnish, or give alcohol to a person under 21. So, parents, listen up. Don't supply. Don't supply to your kids.
I don't think a lot of teenagers listen to this podcast, but I'm sorry if they are listening. Sorry to all the parents. They're about to petition you. I also was looking at Minnesota laws. There's a theme here. I think this podcast is getting a little too Minnesotan, if I'm honest. But one of the other laws I saw related to that is that public drunkenness, I don't know how to say it, is legal in Minnesota. It's illegal in most states. But in Minnesota, you can't, drive a car, but if you're just stumbling around completely sloshed, that's fine.
It's required. Otherwise, we couldn't have the Minnesota State Fair.
Okay. My law is Minnesota related. I'm so sorry, but I'll make it quick. So if you've been to Minnesota, you might know this, but our unofficial state bird is the mosquito. We've got a lot of them flying around, and we actually have a law related to mosquitoes that declares them a public nuisance. So if it's something's a public nuisance, that would be, imagine a tree falls in the middle of the road. It's a public nuisance. You can call the government and get them to come help you. So Minnesotans, we voted for this. So we can request for the abatement of mosquitoes with aid from the government because they are officially a public nuisance.
Wow.
That is totally fair.
Can we declare it an emergency, like an actual state of emergency?
You can declare it a nuisance and request help.
Yeah, I'm not saying the government's going to help you, but I think you could technically call them and say, I'm having a mosquito problem. And, they'll bring those helicopters that spray mosquito stuff. Will they help you? Will they not? Who knows? We do have a surplus in Minnesota, so maybe they'll come help you out, but it's to be seen. That's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. We'd like to thank Ayana Klaphaki for producing the show and Taylor De Los Reyes for editing. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you find the show valuable, please leave us a rating and review. And if you'd like to hear more from us, subscribe to our weekly email newsletter. It's built for marketers seeking research-first analysis of the latest trends. You can go to marketingarchitects.com/newsletter to subscribe. Now go forth and build great marketing.
Pigs, drinking, mosquitoes. Why do we stay here?
Yeah, we should maybe start a petition to add some ad fraud laws to the list. I think maybe. Clearly, we've got some time on our hands.